And we're
And
back.
we are back. Hey,
Beat
my
you.
name is my name is Morris. The interrupting fella is Brian, and this is Dream Idiots, where each week Brian and I tell each other stories and bring you along for the ride if you are so inclined. And that really hasn't changed for the last 129 episodes, has it, Brian?
You were spot on. That is
That's
definitely
coming
correct.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for tagging along with us. Each week we have two stories, and nine times out of ten we come to the episodes with stories that the other person doesn't know is coming. So it's always a bit of a surprise. If you can, though, wherever you're listening to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, any of the random apps that are out there. We're on all of them. If you can give us 5 stars and shoot us a review, that would be hugely helpful. You can check us out on dreamidiots.com. We have 128 episodes, 129 episodes back catalog there, some merchandise, etc. And then we're on both Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots. And if you wanted to shoot us a story idea or a curse word or something else, or just want to say hi, you can drop us a line at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com. And this
And
week,
Brian, if you have that feeling that you're being watched by
uh-huh,
someone, you are
I am.
because
Oh shit.
we have a guest this week. Another guest genius here on Dream Idiots, Katie Totman. Hi, Katie.
Hello. Thank you guys for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, you bet. We are looking forward to it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're, excuse me, what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so wow, I don't even know what to say. I live in New Braunfels. I am married with a couple of pets. I work for local government. And on my off time, I also have a podcast called Malice and Mocktails. And we do
Oh,
true crime and um, a like alcohol free or other mocktail type beverage at the end as a palate cleanser. So,
both literally
yeah.
and figuratively. That's nice. I
Yes.
like that. Yes, my wife has actually tried a couple of your mocktails, I believe. I'll
Oh,
have to check in
cool.
with her.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it's been a while
sweet.
because she normally makes the real thing,
Yeah.
but she likes to occasionally come up with stuff for those of us who don't drink. So that's really
Awesome.
nice, like myself.
Very cool.
Um,
And so,
so
so is there a URL or just people can just search for Malice and
Oh
Mocktails?
yeah, yeah. So we're on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay,
It's all of them are at Malice and Mocktails. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or really any of the podcatchers out there. So yeah, just search
sweet.
Malice and Mocktails and you can find us.
all
Yeah, it's
right.
definitely good stuff. I've listened to three or four. The last one I listened to was your episode on horse crime and horse
Oh
racing
my gosh.
and all that. That was probably that was a year ago, 6 months ago.
I would say probably 6 months ago. We're on a
Okay,
little bit of a hiatus. But yeah, we
yeah,
had
yeah,
Emily
but
had
definitely good
a
stuff.
really good time. Yeah, no, that was a
Yeah,
fun one.
great story.
And because of your podcast and your interests, Brian and I have kind of let each other know what this is about because we're not a true crime podcast, except the episodes where we
Except where we
are.
are, right?
And this is one of them. It's episode
Cool.
130. And are we ready to start?
You can go.
All right. Ryan, Katie, do you know that old saying, if you love what you do for a living, you'll never work a day in your life?
Mhm.
Oh
You
yeah.
ever heard that? Okay.
Yes.
Well, Alan Berg loved pissing people off, and he was very good at making a living at it, and he did it for good reasons. Alan was born January 18th, 1934, to Joseph and Ruth Berg in Chicago, Illinois, one of my favorite cities. He had a sister, Norma, 6 years his senior. His hair was bright red, his cheeks full and robust, leading the family to give him the nickname Peachy Puss.
That's
As
terrible.
un- it is as unfortunate a nickname as we've heard here on Dream Idiots, I think. Peachy Puss would be the first of Alan's many nicknames. By all accounts, Alan was a well-liked and happy child, although he was prone to incredible outbursts of anger. His mother tells of a time Alan, in a fit of rage, brought out a present for his mother, one he'd purchased well in advance of her birthday. He unwrapped it and then stomped all over it in front of her.
Good Lord.
He then excused himself, took it away, and rewrapped it. Ruth Berg describes this as, quote, innovative. Alan had an entrepreneurial spirit from early on, delivering groceries and selling magazines by the age of 8. By 12, he had his dream job, working in a shoe store, where he stayed for a few years. He became an avid golfer, a stamp collector, photographer, an amateur magician. By his teens, his nickname had evolved from Peachy Puss to another one, which reflected both his red hair and his occasional angry outburst. And that name was Fumy Plumy.
Oh no.
Alan's father, Joseph, was a dentist in Beverly Hills. Not that Beverly Hills. This Beverly Hills is located on the far south side of Chicago. Joseph had a successful practice and provided very well for his family. His wife and children acknowledged his hard work, but noted that he catered to the Gentile community. At home, he was Jewish. At work, he passed for Gentile, appearing, quote, Swedish, according to his daughter Norma. This apparent deception caused a rift between father and son. Quote, my father was a hypocrite and bigot against anything that wasn't Jewish, Alan said years later. As a kid, I would say to him, how can you go to the temple on weekend and hold yourself up to be a Gentile during the week? Now, my mother had a similar group of people that she referred to in this way.
Mhm.
She referred to them as Sunday go-to-meeting Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
I think
yeah.
we've all known folks like that at some time or another who are very good at acting Christian on Sundays and screw the rest of the week. Norma, Berg's sister, said her father was a very naive man. He lived in a world he set up and his limits were very small. He was very chauvinistic about being Jewish, but really wasn't that involved in being Jewish, as none of us are. My father was very prejudiced against Black people. That affected Alan. Hypocrisy. And finally, Ruth noticed the biggest difference among the four family members. The three of us, myself and Norma and Alan, had this understanding and a sense of humor, but my husband didn't have that. It left him a little on the outside. As Alan grew older, his concern over hypocrisy would remain at the center of his being. He headed west for college and enrolled at the University of Colorado in Boulder, just up the road from where I am. He was 17 years old. He chose Colorado because several friends from Chicago were already there, members of the Jewish Phi Sigma Delta fraternity. One came to ski, another because the mountain air soothed his asthma. Alan was there, a few of his brothers surmised, because several states now separated him from his father. Alan picked up, guess what he picked up in college, Brian? New
Alcoholism?
nicknames. You're right. You're right. New nicknames. An obvious one like Bergie, and the more creative Thermo, which razzed his dress, appearance, and temper all at the same time. He favored all white tailored suits, and his shock of red hair and explosive temper reminded his frat brothers of a thermometer. His lanky frame and particular attention to his wardrobe, bordering on foppishness, led to Ichabod Crane comparisons. He would always be fastidious about his fashion. Alan majored in psychology and had a robust secret life away from his fraternity brothers. In Denver, he had regular appointments with a psychiatrist and a part-time job selling shoes. He also claimed to have been married, briefly, during this period of his life. He met an older woman at a Boulder bar, but she wouldn't have sex with him unless they got married. So they got married. And Alan would slip away at night from the Phi Sigma Delta house and head across town to rendezvous with his wife. He'd head back to campus before dawn. According to Alan in later interviews, this arrangement lasted about a month and then the marriage was annulled. A frat brother, Stan Gardenschwartz, calls bullshit on this story. I was his roommate. I'm a light sleeper. I would have known if he were doing that. Alan transferred to the University of Denver after 2 years. He had developed interests in jazz music, African American culture, and a young woman named Judith Halpert. She was an accomplished dancer, 2 years his junior, and they hit it off immediately. As a bonus, he got along well with her parents, who were sophisticated, involved in global affairs and the arts scene. The Halpert household hosted Black musicians who could not stay in downtown Denver hotels. At one time or another, Duke Ellington, Ray Brown, Oscar Peterson, Pearl Bailey, and Paul Robeson passed through the Halpern home as guests. He loved the idea of this liberal Jewish experience, but he didn't always fit in, much in the same way he didn't fit in with the white Republican golf club scene he sometimes inhabited. He found in Judith a partner who questioned her own Jewishness and how that informed her life. Alan studied law at the University of Denver and then bounced around to different law schools. University of Miami, DePaul in Chicago, Northwestern, then back to DePaul. Judith lived her own life attending a junior college in Massachusetts and then studying for 2 years at Juilliard School of Music. She returned to the University of Denver in pursuit of a linguistics degree. She wanted to be an educator rather than a performer. Alan and Judith visited each other whenever they could and were very supportive of each other's goals. And I promise the crime is coming.
And sorry, Morris, what year are we in? The 50s or
We
60s?
right now we are in the early 50s. Yeah,
Okay.
early 50s. Alan graduated from law school at the astonishing age of 22 and married
Wow.
Judith in 1958. He clerked for Chicago law firms before striking out on his own as a defense attorney. He, I believe, was the second youngest person in the history of the Illinois bar to get a law degree.
Wow.
Pretty impressive. By the early 60s, he had a thriving practice, working on behalf of shoplifters and sex workers. He may have defended mafia members. Alan had a reputation as an excellent attorney, able to analyze, quote, the psychological possibilities inherent in each jury. But he was torn between his duty as an attorney and his knowledge that some of his clients were guilty of their crimes. The worst of them, the rapists, the murderers, loomed at the edge of his consciousness. He was making, according to some reports, in the early 60s, $100,000 a year.
Holy cow.
Uh-huh. That's a number which impressed his father, a rare acknowledgement of his son's success. He said it was one of the few times his dad actually shook his hand in his life. Health-wise, Alan began to have two major problems during this time. The first was a series of seizures, moving from Pity Mall to Grand Mall as he became busier and busier with his law practice. And Bryan, you mentioned this earlier. He started drinking heavily, and in short order was a full-blown alcoholic. Years later, he would relate his drunken adventures in Chicago, including ones where he parked his car in Lake Michigan, and another where he started a fight with Dick Butkus, one of the nastiest men in the history of professional football. He was also bored despite his successful law practice, so he tried some side hustles. He and Judith promoted jazz concerts. He opened a toy store and even gave stand-up comedy a shot, a nod to his legal defense of the great Lenny Bruce, who was once charged with obscenity in the city of Chicago. None of it lasted, and his one stand-up engagement was a bomb, despite coaching from Jackie Mason. And Alan finally had a diagnosis for his seizures, a large brain tumor, the removal of which was absolutely necessary. The surgery was successful, and although he had scars he would hide with long bangs for the rest of his life, the Grand Mall seizures vanished, although occasional Petit Mall ones would still occur. His drinking didn't abate, though, and he was depressed over his perceived career failures. Alan was deteriorating. Judith realized that a change was necessary. The couple moved to the city they left behind a decade earlier, Denver. The transition wasn't easy. It began with Alan's voluntary commitment to the psych ward at St. Joseph Hospital to curb his drinking. And after a while, something changed in Alan Berg. He was still depressed, but he was feeling stronger. He stopped drinking, then and there, for the rest of his life. He also planned to escape the psych ward, although not in the typical way. He knew he probably wouldn't go back to practicing law, but he needed something to do. So one day, Judith checked him out of the St. Joseph's for the afternoon. The couple headed over to the ritzy Cherry Creek Shopping Center. Alan had spied an ad in the newspaper earlier that morning. Fontius Shoes, salesman wanted. He shoved his hospital ID bracelet as far up his arm as it would go, secured it with Scotch tape, and tidied himself up. He talked his way into a job on the spot. He had escaped. Every day he walked from his in-laws' home to the shopping center for work. He held this job for a while until he was fired. He had offended a regular customer, a wealthy society woman who insisted that Alan stop what he was doing, which at the time was assisting an African-American woman, and serve her. Alan was the only employee on duty, and he told her he would be with her as soon as he was finished. That was the end of Alan's shoe career. But within days, he had another job, selling high-end men's clothing. He was nothing if not persistent. This would lead to Alan's next business enterprise, the Shirt Broker, his own men's fashion store. Let me take a little break here because there's two terms that we use here, Katie, on Dream Idiots to describe our writing, and that's a longie and a shorty. As you can tell, this is a longie. Normally my scripts are about 5 pages. This one's close to 9. I apologize.
Okay.
But let's go a little bit northwest of Denver, where dark forces were on the rise and had been for some time. Parts of the Pacific Northwest were, and still are, hotbeds of white nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of
Oregon,
like Mordor. It's kind of like Mordor, but with neo-Nazis instead of orcs. Personally, I'd take the orcs. The white nationalist group that would take center stage in Alan Berg's story was called the Order. It was one of the newer groups, founded in September of 1983, just outside of Medellin, Washington, in Pend Oreille County. Pend Oreille is the most northeastern county in Washington state, bordered by Idaho to the east and British Columbia, Canada to the north. The order was heavily influenced by, as domestic terrorist and well-known shithead Timothy McVeigh would be over a decade later, William Luther Pierce's 1978 novel, say it with me, everybody, The Turner Diaries. You guys heard of this
Yeah.
horrible, horrible book? This book depicts the overthrow of the United States government and a subsequent race war in which all non-whites, Jewish people included, are exterminated. It's not a parody. It's the gospel for white nationalists and anti-government assholes everywhere. I'm not terribly inclined to give the order or groups like it too much ink here. It's one of your typical white nationalist terrorist organizations hell-bent on founding a white Christian ethno-state. Other groups in this movement include and have included the Patriot Front, the American Nazi Party, the Silver Legion of America, and of course the Ku Klux Klan. The order and others of its ilk appear here because Alan Berg would be taking them on, not in his role as a lawyer or shoe salesman or haberdasher, but in the part he was born for, talk radio host. In 1971, thanks to his hobnobbing with Denver's elite at the Shirt Broker, Alan landed a slot as a weekend guest on KGMC radio. He and the audience were hooked. Soon he had his own show on KGMC, and for the better part of a decade, he would bounce from station to station in the Denver market until he landed at KOA in 1981. This would be his final stop. Alan could make a show out of nothing at all. He did a show once, said a longtime listener, on which way to roll your toilet paper, over or under. People responded for hours. Some got so angry that they hung up. Before long, the audience both loved and loathed him. He challenged preconceptions, called out his lifelong nemesis, hypocrisy, wherever he saw it, including in himself. But he always allowed the callers the space to speak on his program, including anti-Semites and other racists. If he wasn't a religious man, Alan Berg was a civic one. He truly believed in freedom of speech. This made him unpopular in certain circles, including members of the American Jewish Committee. A spokesperson for the organization said, quote, "Our view is that you don't give groups like the neo-Nazis access to speak on the radio, as Berg did. You don't give them a chance to spread their poison. Basically, I couldn't stand Alan Berg." And that's a rough area, right? I mean, do we give these folks a chance to talk and then shoot them down in proper debate or not? We see it as a college campus problem all the time these days. On June 18th, 1984, Alan was going strong. His radio show was popular, and though his marriage to Judith had ended in divorce some years prior, they were in the process of reconciliation. He had a nice home and a wonderful Airedale Terrier who physically resembled him with its long frame and bushy bearded face. After dinner, Alan dropped Judith off in the Cherry Creek area to meet with friends. He drove home to feed his dog. As he unfolded himself out of his VW Bug, the sound of automatic gunfire cut through the Denver night. Berg was struck multiple times in the head, chest, and neck. He died in his driveway. He was 50 years old. And here's where I should tell you all about his killers, their motivations, and so on, but I don't want to. They were hate-filled men living out the fantasy provided for them by the Turner Diaries. I'll say here that 4 members of the order were indicted on federal charges for the murder of Alan Berg. Only 2 of them were convicted. The 2 found guilty were sentenced to a combined 422 years in prison.
Oh, good.
The 2 who were acquitted still had to serve a combined 100 years for racketeering charges. And yes, the assassination of Alan Berg served as one of the bases for the Pulitzer Prize-nominated play Talk Radio, written by Eric Bogosian, and the subsequent 1988 film of the same name directed by Oliver Stone. I'll close now with some quotes about Alan Berg from the people who knew him. Here's some things from his listeners. He looked at the dark side, the ugliness in himself, and wanted others to look at it in themselves. That makes folks uncomfortable. Another listener. The killers made him a very serious person. It's like Hitler created Israel. Did you know there's now a memorial forest in Israel for Berg? Another listener. He couldn't take yes for an answer. Another listener. He was morally outraged without being morally superior. And finally, he had something beyond the courage of his own convictions. He had the courage of his perceptions. Here's a few thoughts from his family, friends, and coworkers. From Bob Palmer of KCNC TV Denver. Meeting him for the first time was like seeing an 8-piece band come through the door playing out of tune. His ex-wife, Judith Berg, said, his mind was like carbonated water. And finally, from his mother, Ruth Berg. Norma and I were together when we learned who killed Alan. We started to laugh. We said, of all things, Alan being killed because he was a Jew, the most un-Jewish Jew imaginable. What Alan said about himself and his profession. He once said, I'm not half of what I should be. I could have accomplished so much more in my life if I'd not been caught up in neurotic behavior. He said, talk radio is like Russian roulette. When you push that button, you never know what will happen. And he also said, if you have the chance to be on the radio, why not enjoy it? It's all going to end one day. There's nobody who ever entertained who didn't finally have his career cut short. It's going to happen to me someday. And from one last person. Either you ever heard the name Fraser Glenn Miller Jr.? No relation to the big band guys I know. Fraser Glenn Miller Jr.
No idea. Nope.
No.
He was quoted as saying, apparently talk show host Alan Berg angered the wrong person once too often. Among those 200,000 listeners were many, many people he would insult in a typical obnoxious Jew fashion. The favorite victims of his arrogant and rude remarks were the American Nazi Party and others who share their common dream of a white, clean, and wholesome America. Fraser Glenn Miller Jr. was a white nationalist, obviously, who at one time received financial backing from the Order. Fraser would murder 3 people during his attack on the Jewish Community Center of Overland, Kansas, and its environs on April 13, 2014. William Kaporon, 69, and his grandson, Reek Griffin Underwood, 14, died as a result of wounds from Miller's shotgun and handgun. Miller fled the scene and fired again at a Jewish retirement center nearby. A woman named Terry Lamano was killed. Miller was found guilty of 1 count of capital murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and various assault and weapons charges. He was sentenced to death on November 10, 2015. He appealed its sentence in March of 2020, arguing that the court should not have allowed him to act as his own attorney in his earlier trial. What a dick. He died May 2021 while on death row in Kansas of natural and hopefully painful causes. Perhaps KOA talk radio host Ken Hamblin, aka the Black Avenger, put it best after Alan's assassination. Quote, he died for our sins. I don't know if Alan would have agreed with that sentiment, but I do know he would have talked about it on the air. Alan Berg, talk radio host, 1934 to 1984.
Wow.
Sources for this piece, the excellent book Talk to Death by a very, very prolific author named Stephen Singular. He's from the Denver area. He actually passed away earlier this year. His 1987 book from Beech Tree Books, a division of William Morrow, called Talk to Death. That was the main source for this. It's a book I read many, many years ago and reread good chunks of it for this. The SPLC.org, that is the Southern Poverty Law Center.org website for info on white supremacist groups and other hate groups in the U.S. It's an invaluable resource for fighting this kind of crap. And Wikipedia for some basic info on Berg, Miller, and other persons in this story. And there you have it, a very brief, although longer than my usual story, look at the assassination of Alan Berg.
Wow.
Any
Nice.
thoughts?
I definitely I recognize the story because I mean, as you approach the end, like, oh, this has got to be the inspiration for talk radio. I remember I saw that movie several times. It's a stressful movie, so yeah, cool story, interesting story. I mean, not cool, but
Yeah.
No,
I'm actually not aware. I didn't know about this this event, and it just, I don't know. It's so senseless. I'm like, why? Like, sorry that he ruffled your feathers, but why do you got to go out and
right, right.
I have no
This
words.
accomplishes what?
Right. It's
it's
terrible.
it's amazing that Fraser Glenn Miller Jr. referred to the American Nazi Party as a victim.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
It's just astonishing and appalling. The other thing that really kind of gets me going on the story is the fact that Alan Berg was a liberal talk show host,
Mm,
something which almost does not exist anymore in this country and hasn't for a long, long time.
right.
Because, in the 80s, of course, we saw the rise of
Yeah. Rush Limbaugh and all those other,
the conservative
right.
movement and this idea
Hmm.
that the idea that there's a liberal media out there. I mean, I could argue that all day. Publishers, owners, and editors tend not to be very liberal. Those folks tend to be pretty darn conservative. And if you look around the landscape today, when people throw around this idea of the liberal media, it's like, just look at AM radio. I
Right.
mean,
Who
Hmm.
do you
and
mean? Right.
portions of FM radio. And a lot of that is due to the fact that a lot of these companies are allowed to own everything in a single market. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
But when you have a liberal talk show host, he's executed.
Well, and it was kind of strange to me because he allowed multiple voices on his show.
Mm-hmm.
Like he didn't suppress anybody. He didn't it or at least it didn't sound like it. Like he was like, "Hey, come on the show, say your piece. We might not agree with you, but
And he would rip them apart with his
yeah,
arguments. And it's like
Right.
you can say it's this whole idea of, well, you're suppressing my free speech. No, you can say what you want, but you know what? We can react to it and say stuff
Right.
back.
right.
Right.
That's what people like Fraser Glenn Miller don't like, is when people hit them back
Challenge
on their
it or
arguments.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or yeah, that well, I mean that's Fox News syndrome. That's when that's when Fox News invites someone who's a little bit centrist or a tiny bit left, and then they just bombard them and interrupt them nonstop and don't let them speak because they can't. Like
Yeah.
yeah, so scumbags, all of them. The liberal media, like I mean, Phil Donahue's dead. He might have been the last one who I know is a lefty. But who else do you mean?
That's about it. I mean, maybe Dick Cavett, but he's been retired for
Right, right.
decades.
Yeah,
So
he's 206, right?
yeah, absolutely. So anyway, as I told you, there's a whole lot of crime right at the very end of that story.
Yeah.
And I apologize for it, but I would have rather focused on the things that made Alan Berg than the things that took him away from us. So
Oh, absolutely.
um,
Right.
anyway, there you go, Alan Berg. And check out the book Talk to Death if you want a real in-depth look at the rise of white Christian nationalism. It's a fascinating
Wow.
book. It's a rough read, but it's very good.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you guys for listening.
So, I do have quickly before we transition to a another crime story, but a lighter crime story. There is a curse word of the week.
Okay.
This one might be fairly obvious because it's profane right from the get-go. In shitification.
Oh,
So
Shitification.
in shitification, this comes. She doesn't know that she's donated this word to the podcast, but I think it's safe to call her a friend of the pod. But certainly a friend of mine posted this on online at some point in the past few days, and I quickly posted in response. By the way, stealing this for the podcast. So enshittification, I mean, is basically this is not her take on it. This is more mine. It's call it entropy. So this is the trend that befalls really cool retail establishments as they start out being really groovy and motivated, and they're taking care of customers and they're building a community and offering good pricing, and then they get taken over by another corporate entity, and there are shareholders, and they go downhill in a boatload of ways. And the best example of this I can think of when I first moved to Austin, I was a huge fan of Whole Foods,
mhm.
organic food that was bulk food sections comparatively inexpensive, and then it became very corporate and shareholders became the boss, and then they achieved maximum enshittification when they were bought by Amazon, and I don't think I've shopped in Whole Foods since. So
I don't think I knew that happened.
I knew they
oh
were
Is
yeah,
bought
that
by Amazon, but
yeah, like
is
it's like 6 or 8 years ago.
is that part of the enshittification process that
Yeah.
they're sly about it and don't know? I mean, you don't know what's happening.
No, I'm stunned you missed it because it got tons of press. And if you go on Amazon, I mean, maybe you have to have a Prime account, which I would bet you do if you have Prime Video. You can order Whole Foods groceries on the Amazon website, and if you want to pay $47 for cashews, there you have it. You can go for it.
My God. It's kind of like how Chewy's has been bought out by Olive Garden, the major corporation that owns Olive
Oh,
Garden.
really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think it's Olive
I
Garden.
think I missed that as well. Oh, so
Yeah, so
breadsticks now at even Chewy's. Oh
nah,
God.
I'm just waiting for the you can't even get Southwestern chicken enchiladas anymore without, hey, there's this thing you guys used to make.
Ugh, God, awful.
I like and hate that term, Brian.
Yes. Okay. There you have it. All right. So, my story is slightly criminal, but is decidedly more silly. Very, very early 2000s, there is a young guy named Michael Townsend. He's out for a jog in downtown Providence, Rhode Island. It's his usual route he does when he's out running. Goes past City Hall, wanders around downtown, passes the State House. One day on his jog, he notices that there is a kind of a gap between one building and another that form portions of the Providence Place Mall. And so accounts here kind of vary a little bit because there are a number of articles about this guy, and they're very scattershot in terms of their details. So I don't know if he was seeing a gap between sort of phase one, phase two of this development, or the shopping and the parking garage. But it's clear this is a gigantic multi-use facility. There's residential, there's commercial. I read somewhere it has 1.3 million square feet just of shopping. So
Good
it's
Lord.
vast. But like the River Center Mall here in San Antonio, I mean, it's downtown. It's put up against a boatload of other things. There are roads going by. There's either a train or subway station underneath, and you can rent boats. You can paddle around the Woonasquatucket River. I just wanted to say Woonasquatucket, and it's right downtown. Woonasquatucket could have been our curse word, and it's obviously a huge center for it's like these mixed use facilities that are popping up everywhere. So on his jog, he kind of spies this weird little dead space, this void that isn't being used and is kind of a graveyard for construction material that was thrown down off the roof, and it's littered with cinder blocks and roofing material and drywall, bits of trash. And he notices, I mean, one of his subsequent trips, toward the back, there's also a couple fire escape stairwells that that drop down into this space, but it's a dead zone. And he keeps it's kind of percolating in his mind. This space is sort of weird, and he begins to sort of ponder maybe there's a way to put it to some use, put it to some practical use, or maybe artistic use. So Townsend is an artist, and I'm not sure whether he was trying to make a statement necessarily, or what his motives were about. I don't think he was trying to say something about efficiency or anything along those lines. But this becomes something that a little project he takes on, I think mostly for fun, as we'll see. So at the River Center Mall, and Morris, I know that you worked retail in malls, and Katie, you may have as well. I know that there are. I certainly worked retail as well, but never really in a mall. I know there are these little nooks and crannies and hallways and just a ton of space that's behind the stores, behind the
Hmm.
whatever. That if you know where to go, you can find them. There was a space. I Morris and I both went to Trinity. I had a complete dweeb of a friend at Trinity. He and his buddies would go, and they found some little alcove in the bottom of a parking garage at Trinity where they'd go play Dungeons and Dragons. It's just stuff like that. Dorks. So at River Center Mall one time, again, probably 35 years ago, on the south side of the mall, that's either Houston or Commerce Street. I think it's Commerce Street. I used to be down there a whole bunch during high school and college, and sitting in a restaurant and realized there would be this occasional, I wouldn't say parade, but occasionally there'd be this homeless person who'd come down the river and then kind of climb up this little embankment and then vanish between this gap between the road, kind of the bridge abutment, and the side of the mall, and he'd just be gone. And then a few minutes later, someone would pop out of the space, like, what the hell's back there? And so one day I actually climbed up there and looked back in there, and there was this little piece of pie space between the road and the edge of the mall that was below ground. That was, I mean, it wasn't great living, but you're out of the wind and out of the rain. And so, better than nothing, I guess, if you're homeless. So over the next few weeks, months, Townsend and a couple of his friends start, he points this out to his friends, and they start cleaning up this little area. But it's very much like Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Redemption when he's kind of sneaking the bits of rock out from his cell. They have to be a little bit careful about this because they're not supposed to be back there. So they can't show up with garbage bags and haul it off quickly. They have to kind of show up and sneak back there and grab a tiny bit of trash and then surreptitiously drop it off in the trash or whatever, right? So they have to be a little bit sneaky. And so it takes forever. So that over weeks and months, they start cleaning the space up. They realize that cinder blocks are kind of hard to dispose of. At least they toss at least one in the river, I know. But then they start, well, okay, we'll hold on to the cinder blocks. So those kind of start getting stacked up in one
Were they
corner.
Vanderbilt graduates?
No, as far as I know, no. Um, and so they keep working at it. And at some point, while they're working on it, they actually reach up and pull down one of the ladders for the fire escapes and climb up the ladder. And one of them finds an actual room up in this space that is, it's mostly enclosed. It actually has three walls, but it's still basically a dead area. It's not being used, but does have a roof over it. So now Townsend gets even busier and feels like he would say later that he had an almost civic responsibility to get some utility out of the space. And so if you go, anyone listening to this, if you go on YouTube or just go to Google and just Google this guy's name or Google Providence Place Mall, and there's video and photos of it. It's pretty funny. So again, he and his friends who are working on this, most of them are also artists with him, and they find this little room, this space. It's 750 square feet, and now they've cleaned it up. They start sneaking furniture in the space, and it's just a fun little art project, and it's an escape where they can use this space. But obviously, it can't really be used much during the day, and they can't really make a whole bunch of noise, and they're paranoid about security, so they have to be pretty careful about it. So Michael and his friends kind of adopt this code of silence about it. Okay, so there are eight of them. They have probably already told too many folks about it, but they all swear, okay, we can't tell anyone else about this. We can all use it, but don't bring your buddies here and don't tell anyone about this because we'll be found out. It's just a little fun little art project. So a few of these artists actually live with Townsend nearby, and they're in a little art collective space. I'm not sure whether he is at the time. Now he's actually what's called. I didn't know this was a thing. He is a tape artist, so he makes money doing large art pieces, and I guess you could call it a mural. But all he uses for his media is blue and green masking tape, painter's tape.
Hmm.
And they have some depth, they're actually pretty cool. I didn't know this was a thing, but it's definitely out there. His art collective space, he finds out that city block where he lives for close to nothing is has been sold. It's going to be torn down, and so now he is out of a house, and quickly learns that he has to move more or less immediately because the whole city block is going to be bulldozed.
Oh my God.
So, so his thought now is, well, shit. My part-time art project now has to become a full-time home. And so that's what he goes about doing is figuring out if it's possible to live in his little stolen space in the Providence Place Mall. So I don't think all the folks that were in the art collective move in there with him. 750 square feet. I think it is just Townsend and his girlfriend at the time. Somehow they managed to reroute electricity into the space. Um, if you watch videos of this, there's actually still frames of lamps and several pieces of furniture. One, I don't know how they did this. There's photos of they slept in an entire china cabinet, and actually it's full of china. Just to make it more artsy, and it's completely ridiculous. They start hanging out there. The group does, sort of more at night, but they have a PlayStation. They hang out. The funniest video of them is them schlepping in somehow what must be an 8-foot sofa. And so there's still frames again of this photo suspended from one end being pulleyed up this fire escape and being slid into the space. Finally, after a fairly long period of time, they realize, oh, we can put the cinder blocks to use as well. They frame in the open space, the fourth wall. They actually frame it in and use the cinder blocks to close in the space because they want to keep light in. They want to keep to keep noise in as well. And then somebody even goes so far as to go to Home Depot and buy just a shitty basic interior, like a closet door, right? They buy that, slide that in there, and mount that in the space. So that now they have a front door to their stolen mall space. So again, this group has this vow of silence. So they're hanging out there during night only, and during the day they all have to sort of wander off and do other things in order to protect the space. So the whole thing is pretty tenuous, really. I can only assume that all the meals were consumed in the food court. I mean, how much Sparrow and Chick-fil-A can you eat? I guess quite a bit. And oh yeah, there's the little problem of not having plumbing. Electricity is figured out, but there's no running water. Well, that's solved because their little hidden space is fairly close to an incredibly busy movie theater that's open until 2 a.m. And so, got to go to the bathroom. You wait until one of the theaters is letting out, and you slip into the crowd on the way out and stuck into the bathroom along with everybody else. And then, as they're filing out, you sneak back to the apartment. So this sounds incredibly stressful. I mean, the stakes are lower here than Anne Frank, but it's kind of similar in certain respects.
Sounds
And
exhausting.
yeah, it's just we're just completely wear you out. So Townsend loses his original apartment in 2003. Guess how long they're there? I'll take a stab at it.
Mm, over a year.
48 months.
4 years.
Oh,
Holy crap.
In 2007,
4 years?
Townsend breaks his own rule about not talking to anyone about it. And because there is some performance artist or someone coming into town, and he's probably kind of showing off a little bit. Once he tells her about it, wants to show her the secret apartment in Providence Place Mall, and takes her to the apartment. And they're walking through the space, and here's what we did, and isn't this cool? Blah 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 blah. And they're going back to the door to leave. Opens the door, and there's a security guard standing there.
Oh no.
Oh,
The jig is up.
Yeah, so you are screwed. Who, I mean, I picture this guy, whatever. The guard is sitting in the food court, like, I wonder where those two are going. They just vanish into the space, and so follows them in there and finds them. So they're busted. So in terms of criminal masterminds and crimes, again, fairly low. He was definitely arrested. I think just Townsend was arrested, paid a small fine. Not really a big deal. Definitely got a fair amount of publicity over the following weeks and months. 10 years later, in conjunction with the 10th anniversary of them doing this, Townsend was asked to basically rebuild the space in an art gallery. And so he basically, they paid him, they commissioned him to redo the space so that people could see it. And there's photos of that as well. There's sort of mannequins in it. I do think at one point that he and at least one of his friends actually, quote unquote, lived in the space in order to be part of the exhibit, which is, kind of funny. Um, Around that same time, I believe they reached out to the mall as well to see if the mall would want to be a part of any sort of quote celebration, and the mall's response was basically, "Yeah, fuck you. No, we don't want to do that." They had no interest. But first part of this year in 2024, there was a documentary released called "Secret Mall Apartment" that debuted at South by Southwest in March or April of this year. And so it's out there. I believe it is on YouTube about this guy's his exploits.
So what did he have a job? Like, was he working? Because he was living in an apartment, so he had to be paying rent
Yeah,
somehow.
I mean, he may have had other part-time jobs, whatever. When you're a so he's one of those hipster doofus types working in a coffee shop, maybe somewhere, I don't know. how he was making money. It's clear, at least at the time, he was not making much money because having his place bulldozed was going to be an incredible hardship. So, but he managed to live for 4 years rent free
Oh my God.
in the mall.
I'm gonna have to look this up because I'm having a hard time, I guess, visualizing what like what it looks like or how like
Mm.
I'm familiar with like river when you were explaining river center. I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look it up because I'm intrigued.
Yeah, but, part of me wants to sort of see like a floor plan or like what because
Yeah.
so I did not watch the documentary. It is on YouTube, but there's a bunch of other stuff on there, just still frames of these idiots playing PlayStation in what looks like a prison cell because it's all cinder blocks.
Yeah.
So, but still pretty funny.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it's a real, I mean, if you were to go on Reddit, there's a whole series of threads on liminal spaces.
Hmm.
And so
Oh,
I think this really taps into that idea of what is this space for? What it's between something and another state. It's not quite the mall. It's not quite outdoors. What can we do with it? I think it's brilliant personally. I
All
mean,
right, it's very cool and very funny. They would they would do this. So anyway,
oh wow.
it
a
is interesting
silly
that
story.
the mall wouldn't have something. It seems to me that would be good PR for the mall in a time when malls really need good PR.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if you had someone who was willing to be, who was a little bit creative, they could have done something fun and gotten some good press out of this. But
Hmm.
but they're all so corporate now. You could totally see them just being sort of pissed about it and not wanting, we want no part of this. This is we're all outraged. Come on, guys,
Yeah.
And
have an event, get some shoppers into your damn mall.
and
Well, I've
bring
seen
attention. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Katie.
no, I was just gonna say that I've seen uh malls or other spaces like that you have there's no use anymore because rarely people are actually physically going to shopping spaces
Right.
Hmm.
where they've companies have come in and adaptively reused them to create like micro apartments or other
Oh, really?
like hotel places. I mean, I think it's mainly apartments that I've seen
Hmm.
like permanent spaces for people versus like a hotel. But
Well,
yeah.
See, that's to me a good collaboration between civic responsibility and civic organizations
Hmm.
and private sector. Um, I mean, just look at what's going on the East Coast right now in the Carolinas with Helene.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could convert them all to where you could, I mean, as emergency housing, that's fantastic. I
all
Oh
mean,
right.
yeah.
and then in San Antonio, we had the what was the name of that rack space?
Oh
Took
Mhm.
yeah.
over Old
Hmm.
Windsor Park Mall. Um,
Yeah,
just,
but prior to that, I mean, Windsor Park Mall was derelict for
mhm.
a decade at least.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I
Uh,
last worked there in 93 and it was starting to get the tumbleweeds blowing down the concourse kind of feel to it.
right. Just drive buses around, pick up all the homeless folks, and say, "Here you go." It's air conditioned. Three
Yeah.
bathrooms. Have it right.
And there's tons of places where you can go off and be by yourself too.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah,
just
1.5
I'm
million square feet.
I live in a shoebox. We're littler shoebox? No, the old store, the shoebox. The interminable wait for me when my mother was at the shoebox. I once got lost in the mall because she wouldn't come out of the shoebox.
Oh no.
Anyway, that's a great story, Brian. I'll have to look the documentary up. It sounds just, and I mean, it's also a great statement of, and the mall could have turned it into a,
Hmm.
let's do something about housing when a guy's house gets bulldozed. Let's do
Yes.
something about housing
Right.
in
Yes.
Providence.
Right. Right. Nope.
Ah,
Can't do it.
lost opportunity.
Oh well.
It's terrible.
Yeah. So, secret mall apartment, and the artist name Michael Townsend.
Yeah, I'm gonna
That's
have
a
to
good
look this
one.
up too.
Yeah. Pretty funny.
Okay.
Well, that's another one in the books. So, Katie, tell us again. So it's Malice and Mocktails. Where can they find you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. I think I'm on Twitter/X, but I'm not very active on there.
Hmm.
But yeah, otherwise it's at Malice and Mocktails is where y'all can find us. Like I said, we're on kind of a hiatus, but we have, I think, like 50 episodes right now
Mhm.
that you can go listen to, and it's
All
a
right.
mix
Sweet.
of the true crime and mocktail stuff. So, yeah.
Excellent. All
Do
right.
you
Well,
do,
we appreciate you coming on with us.
do you guys specialize in any particular era?
We tend to focus on older crimes, so 50
Mm-hmm.
years and older. It's not a hard stop by any
Right.
means. It's just something that we tend to enjoy more than the newer stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being here and being our guest genius for this episode.
Yeah,
It's always nice to
absolutely.
it's always nice to talk to other folks besides Bryan and myself because
Hey,
I
he's
talked
he's sick of me.
I talk to myself all the time and I'm sick of me. So
No, I really appreciate it. And just a quick, if you're looking for some other like fun, kind of lighthearted crime, there's one case I came across. It's outside of our like what we usually do. I may still cover it, but it's the maple syrup heist in I think Quebec, Canada. And it
I
says,
covered that on this
oh, you
podcast.
did? Oh, oh,
Like
nice. Okay, I'm gonna
like
have
the
to go back and
first,
listen to it.
yeah,
it was an early one, yeah.
Okay.
the Great Maple Syrup Heist. That was first 6 months probably.
Oh, dang. Maybe okay. Well, my bad.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. It is hilarious.
yes,
The most Canadian crime ever.
quite the caper. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Oh yeah. All right. Thanks for listening, folks. Check us out at dreamidiots.com. Give us 5 stars and shoot us a review if you don't mind. Drop us a line at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail. Again, Facebook and Instagram, we're at Dream Idiots. And as always, we appreciate you tagging along and listening to our silliness.
Yes, sir. And check out Malice and Mocktails while you're out there on your podcatchers and
Absolutely.
check it out. And as always, be good to each other.